Practically every software application needs to support creating accounts with an email and a password. In theory, vibe coding tools like Lovable and Cursor make this a breeze. But in reality, it's extremely easy to mess this up. In this video, I'm going to show you guys step by step how to implement authentication in your applications. Your users are going to be able to create an account with an email password or a Google sign-in. They'll also be able to reset their passwords, and nobody's gonna be able to log into your app without first creating an account. I'm gonna assume you've never written a line of code in your life. That is, without AI assistance. Warning, I will be explaining some technical concepts in detail. My expectation is not for you to become an expert overnight, but you will learn enough to be able to guide the AI effectively. The reality is, if you want to get good at vibe coding, you have to understand some basics about building applications and software development in general. The prompting tricks and techniques realistically can only get you so far. Eventually, in order to build real apps, you're gonna have to actually know what's going on. My name's Tommy Eberle. I've been a software developer for well over 5 years, and recently I've been building out a lot of different applications using AI tools like Claude Code and Cursor. This is gonna be the first video in a series where I explain my system for building software using AI. I'm gonna go over all the fundamental concepts you need to know, and I'm gonna explain everything step by step. Even if you don't have a technical background whatsoever, what I'm explaining in this video should be digestible, and by the end of the series and by the end of each video, you'll be able to be far more effective with the AI. That being said, let's get into the video. The first thing I want to talk about is the problem of authentication, the issues that we have, and why we even have logins to begin with. If we look over here, I've got my Google Drive open, and you can see I've got some folder. It's called Super Important Project. I've also got my icon in the top right here. I've got the ability to sign out, and basically when I'm logged in here, Google knows that it's actually me, Tommy Eberle, using their service. And anywhere I navigate around, it's going to know, yep, that's Tommy, and it knows that I have access to these documents, to the folders in my drive, all of that kind of stuff. Anywhere in our application, under the hood, basically what Google is doing is they are confirming that I am actually who I say I am. How that works is, first, I go and actually sign in, so that's usually gonna be with an email and a password. And once I sign in, Google is going to give me what's called a token, which you should think of as sort of like a driver's license. This token or driver's license is gonna have my name, it's gonna have other information like my email address, maybe some permissions, and it's also gonna have a signature from Google that makes it authentic. And if you think about a driver's license, you can tell when a driver's license is real versus when it's fake, or at least it's usually pretty easy. You go to the DMV and the DMV stamps it with their seal of approval. They actually have specific laminations and other markers on there that only the DMV can use. And the idea is that if anybody looks at your driver's license, they can tell that it's legit. And once they know that it's legit, they can read the information like your name, your address, your height, all of that stuff, and know that the information is validated and that they can trust it. When we're talking about authentication in a software app, it's actually very similar. We can think of the authentication provider as sort of the DMV. So when you provide your username and password, or even when you first sign up for an app, really what you're doing is it's kind of like going to the DMV and registering for a driver's license. And when you register for a driver's license, you're able to use that license until it expired. So there is an issue date and there is an expiration date. That's the same with logging into a software application, and that's often why you'll have to re-sign into applications. That's kind of like your driver's license expired, and so you got to go straight to the DMV before you can get on the road. So authentication is really all about making sure that I'm actually who I say I am, and the process for which all across our application, we can continually validate that, yes, that's actually Tommy, we believe him, his driver's license, or rather his token is legit. A related problem that we're not going to talk about in this video is authorization. And authorization is similar, but it's more about what is Tommy allowed to access. So now that I am Tommy, Google agrees that I am who I say I am. They know that this is me controlling my accounts. How does Google know that I'm allowed to see some of these documents? How does it know I'm allowed to not see other documents? If you send me a Google Drive link to a protected document, how does it know that I'm not allowed to access this, even if it knows that it's me? So we're gonna talk about that in the next video. Right now, what we're really concerned with is adding a login. So in your application, we wanna be able to basically add a button that does this. You can sign out, you can sign in. We're gonna add email, password authentication. We're also gonna add sign in with Google. And I know it sounds like a lot, but it's gonna be relatively straightforward. So let's go into my application. And if you watch my Cursor tutorial from about a week ago, which I highly recommend if you haven't, we built this basic tic-tac-toe application. And I'm running it locally. And as you can see here, if I refresh the page, nothing really changes, and there's no button in the top right that has my account. And actually, you don't need an account to access this application. So if we were to deploy this somewhere on the internet, anyone would be able to go to the website. So maybe it's tictactoe.com, and they would be able to play without creating an account, and they would be able to do pretty much anything they wanted on the site. It's hard to create an application that's useful in 2025 that doesn't have some layer of authentication, that doesn't have some concept of users and sign in, sign out. And usually what you want to do is block your app, or at least the vast majority of your app, to anyone that isn't signed in. So right now, anyone can just go to my tic-tac-toe app. Well, not really, because it's not deployed. It's only running on my laptop. But if it were deployed, anyone could go to my app and they could start playing. Whereas if you go into Google Drive and you're not signed in, Google is going to detect that you're not signed in, and it's going to say, hey, your token is expired, your license is expired, or you don't even have a license, so you have to go and sign in. You have to go to the DMV before you can do anything, and we're just going to block you from accessing anything. So we're going to add that today in the tic-tac-toe application. But I mentioned that we have this concept of a DMV, or an authentication provider. So in order to implement authentication in our application, we need to basically build a DMV. We need to build a place where we can store all of the users, which is going to be a list of people's emails, and we need to know when their licenses were created, when they were expired. And we need to do a lot of other stuff to get this working. And if you go to Cursor and you type something like this in, hey, we need to add authentication to the app, please do it, it probably will do something good. It probably will do something that works, but it's very unlikely to do it correctly. The chances that it gets it right initially are very low. It's probably going to make some serious mistakes. And what that's going to mean is your application is going to be built on a very shaky foundation. And as you go deeper and deeper into vibe coding, into making changes to your app, the AI is going to become less and less effective. And as you want to add more complicated features, it's going to continue to break more and more big parts of the app. So that's why it's so important that we get authentication right. And that's why it's important that we don't just send a prompt like this, because realistically what's going to happen here is the AI might even go out and try to implement its own DMV. So it might try to build the DMV from scratch. And it's not that the AI doesn't necessarily know how to do that, but when you don't give it a lot of information, when you're not very opinionated, it's likely going to cut some corners. It's not going to necessarily use best practices. And also, it's going to reinvent the wheel. So people have already implemented a lot of this stuff for us, and we're going to basically just use that. But by having the AI not do that, we're relying on it to actually reinvent the wheel correctly, which is very unlikely to do, at least in my experience. So we do not want to do something like this. Don't just say add authentication to the app, even if it gets something working, because it's going to essentially create the DMV and all of that stuff that really is complicated under the hood. So we don't want to have Cursor do that. Instead, we want to use a third-party provider to actually create our authentication. So I mentioned we need this DMV. We need this place where we can go that's legit, that's going to issue the tokens, or rather the driver's licenses, and that we're going to be able to check throughout our app. So what we're going to use is a service called Clerk. So you can go to it, it's clerk.com. You can create an account on Clerk, and then within Clerk, you can create applications. So I'm not going to go through the sign up on Clerk. It's very straightforward, and you can build a lot of stuff on the free tier. I'm actually on the free tier myself. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to create a new application. So go ahead and hit create application. And the first thing you're going to see is the sign in button. So that's what it's talking about. Let's build your sign in. And this is going to be a button that you're going to be basically able to embed into your app. When I say you, I mean Cursor or Claude Code or whoever is going to embed this into your app. We're just going to help Cursor to do that. And you can see here that basically for free, so let's call this application Tic-Tac-Toe by Tommy. Tic-Tac-Toe by Tommy is my application, and you can see here that on the right, this is literally what our button is going to look like. And if we want to support different types of authentication, we can do phone number, we can do username, we can do Facebook, whatever. For our purposes, we're just going to do email and Google. And the nice thing here is we don't have to wire any of this up in terms of Google, Facebook, all that stuff. Clerk is also going to handle all the emails. So if a user has to reset their password, this is going to all go through Clerk. We don't have to create any accounts. If a user wants to sign in with Google, they are going to handle all that complexity. And so basically this is like a pre-built DMV that we can just plug into our application. And as you can see, if we wanted to have Cursor or the AI implement a button like this, well, it would have to figure out how to do the email, and then it would figure out how to have to do the Google. That's a lot of different stuff. And then importantly, what if you want to do two-factor? What if you want to have reset passwords? All of that stuff is going to be really painful to set up. And so that's why Clerk is so useful. And with just this, we're going to be able to do a lot. So let's hit create application. All right, so we have created the application, and we are greeted with the screen here, which is going to be the install instructions. And the first thing you're going to notice is you have to select the framework you're using. And it's okay if you have no idea which framework you're using. What I would recommend is take a screenshot of this, paste it into something like Cursor, and go ahead and ask the AI, hey, which of these frameworks is most relevant? In my case, I'm going to be using just vanilla React with Vite, but in your case, you might be using Next.js. This really depends on where you created the app. If you created it in Lovable, you're probably just going to be on React. If you use V0, it's probably going to be Next.js. If you use Claude Code or Cursor, really depends on what the prompt was, but it's probably React. But anyway, don't be afraid to ask the AI. It's going to help you. Now, there's a bunch of instructions here. I think this guide actually assumes you haven't created the app yet. So this is probably a good guide to use if you're creating the app from scratch. That being said, if you've already created the app, it's going to be a little bit different. Now, I'm going to go over some of the important stuff, and then we're going to actually go ahead and copy this prompt, which is really, really nice that they offer this. Basically, if you notice, I can go and paste this into Cursor, and it's going to have a lot of instructions that are very explicit on how to actually implement this authentication. But before we do that, I do want to understand a little bit about what's going on under the hood, specifically the env file. So up here, I wouldn't worry too much about setting things up or installing dependencies. The AI is going to do that for you. What we really care about is this here, the Clerk publishable key. Now, when I said before that Clerk is kind of like a DMV that we can plug into our application, well, if our application is going to be using Clerk, and notice that we have a specific application called Tic-Tac-Toe by Tommy. Well, in our application somewhere here, we basically have to have instructions to the code that says you're going to use the Tic-Tac-Toe by Tommy application on Clerk as your DMV. So the way that that's done is with this thing called the key. So we go here, it's called the Vite Clerk publishable key. And this is publishable, which means it's actually fine to share this. This is actually going to get sent to your users, and it's going to be embedded in their web browsers. But basically, this is the most important part of the configuration. You need to make sure this is pointing to your application. And every time you create a new application on Clerk, this key is going to change. So in a way, when we say Tic-Tac-Toe by Tommy, this one, that is equivalent to saying pk underscore test underscore c3v blah, 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 blah. Obviously, when we're talking in English, this is a lot easier to work with than the key. So I'm in Cursor again, and I'm going to go into my file browser, and I want to show you guys the .env file because this is really important. Now you'll notice it's going to be in the top level of your project. It's going to be called .env. And what we're going to do is paste key value pairs into it. So you could say some key, and then you would say equals my value. You could have another key, and that's going to be equal to 1, 2, 3. And the convention is to have all the keys be in all caps and using underscores. The left-hand side, we're going to say this is the key, and the value is associated with the key. So in this .env file, we have the key some key with the value my dash value. We have another underscore key with the value 1, 2, 3, 4. And the reason these are called .env or environment files, environment variable files, is that these differ based on the environment. So when I'm running on my laptop, this file is going to look different than when I deploy the app to production. Some of the information in these files is going to be secret. So if you have API keys, like an OpenAI API key or something like that, you really want it to be secret, and you definitely don't want to send it to your users. Some of the information is going to be public. Now, anything that has this Vite underscore prefix is going to be public, and that means that your users are going to be able to see it directly, and that's totally okay. But the thing to keep in mind is this is going to differ based on your environments, and they are a little sensitive, so be careful. Now, what Clerk is telling us to do, and what's actually included in the prompt they sent, is in our .env file, we need to go over here and paste in the Clerk publishable key. And what's going to happen is our application is going to read this key at runtime, and it's going to be able to then link up to our Clerk instance, which again is basically like our DMV. So this is the most important part of the configuration. The rest, hopefully the Clerk prompt is going to handle for us. And yeah, it's giving us some code snippets. Of course, we're not going to be writing any of the code. The AI is going to be doing that. But you can kind of see here how we're grabbing the publishable key, which will allow us to figure out which DMV we're going to go to authenticate our users. And yeah, so anyway, we got all that going. Now let's go ahead and copy the prompt. Let's paste this in here. And whoops, I don't want to do that. Let's paste this into the chat window. And we're going to kind of skim it. And you're going to notice that it's got different sections. It's in markdown format, so it's following all of that stuff. I really like here how it's giving a link to clerk.com, especially with any third-party tools. With the AI, you want to be encouraging it to use web search. So you want to tell it, hey, here's the website you can go to if anything is unclear. If you don't do this, it's going to be going from memory. And it's probably memory from a year ago or maybe even a year and a half ago. And a lot of this stuff changes quickly. So it's better if it can go to the actual website and read through things there. And you're going to notice that it's telling us how to create the project, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't necessarily paste this in without anything. I would say something like, all right, so here's the prompt I came up with, and we're going to read it through for you guys. I want to add the ability for users to create accounts and log into my app. I decided to use a third-party provider called Clerk. On Clerk's website, they have the following instructions for implementation. And then I just pasted what was there from Clerk. And as we can see here, there's a lot of instructions. We can see like the publishable key, all of that kind of stuff. And then down here, I'm saying, I'm not sure all the instructions will be relevant. We've already created our app, for instance. And what I mean by that is, in these instructions, is actually saying, hey, this is how we actually set up the app using create React app. And we're already past that step. So I don't want to confuse the AI and make it think that it must do that, because we've kind of already done that. Also, I've already added the publishable key to our .env file, and that's what we just did over here. I want to prevent users from visiting any page of our app if they aren't signed in. Come up with a plan for how to implement this and run it by me before you write any code. So let's go over the important pieces here. So first of all, I'm giving it the context that, hey, I got this from Clerk. I don't know if all of it is relevant. So telling it that information is going to be super helpful, letting it know that these instructions are coming from somewhere else. And also I'm putting these in these backticks, which just makes it clear from a formatting perspective where my information is coming from, where they're talking to Tommy, and then where we're getting some third-party inputs. And another important piece is explaining to it what we already did. So the fact that I modified this env file, I want to let it know that. And actually, let's go ahead and delete these keys that aren't relevant. It would probably be able to figure that out, but it's also helpful for the AI to know that we've sort of already taken a stab at this. And then the most important part is this last part where I'm telling it what is the desired end state of this instructions. I want to be able to prevent users from accessing any page of the app if they aren't signed in. That's important because based on what I want, that is going to affect how the AI is actually going to implement the instructions that it's seeing here from Clerk. And your application may be different. Maybe there's some pages where it's okay for the user to visit without being logged in, and maybe there's some that they really have to be logged in for. So that's going to be completely up to you, but it's important to do that and not just blindly paste in this prompt, although the prompt is definitely going to help a lot. And the last thing I'll do is, please use web search if you need to. So I'm encouraging it, please go on the internet and look stuff up. That is going to make your life a lot easier. So let's go ahead and run this and see what it comes up with. I'm explicitly having it run a plan by me. I still recommend doing this, even if you're not a developer and you're not familiar with what it's necessarily going to say, because it's helpful to get a high-level overview of what's going to happen before you go and approve a big change like this. So let's go ahead. It looks like it's not struggling too much, but it messed up on some files. It's reading different stuff. It's doing a web search right here. That looks really good. And we're basically going to wait until it's finished to continue. All right, so it's outputting the plan here. It says, based on my research and examination of your setup, blah, blah, blah. So yep, I'm using React plus Vite. It figured out where the main files are. That's looking good. Yeah, the key is in the env. It's noticing that it needs to install the dependencies. Again, don't worry too much about knowing what all these parts mean, but I just want to make sure that it's not doing anything insane. So it's going to install the package. It's going to verify everything. It's going to go ahead and actually modify the code itself, and then it should work. Okay, cool. That looks good. And if you're not sure, like one of the things that I want in the app is I want to have a header that is present. It has the login, sign up, all those buttons. So I'll mention that I also want a header. So I'll say, this looks good. I also want a header in the app that will have the login, sign up, log out buttons. And also say hello to the user somewhere when they are logged in with their name. So I wanted to say like, hey, Tommy, once you're logged in, which it should be able to do. So I'm going to say, go ahead. I just had this one extra thing, and it's going to go ahead and implement that for us, and we'll go and check on it. But while we're doing that, within Clerk, if you go into users, nobody's going to be here yet, but in Clerk, this is where your admin dashboard is going to be. So any of your users, once they are created, you'll be able to see them here. You'll be able to see how they created the account. So if it's username, password, Google, whatever, you're going to be able to see when they last signed in. You can do stuff like ban users. You can, I think, whitelist people if you only want to allow certain emails to even create accounts on your app. You can impersonate users. So if you have a user that's saying, hey, it's looking really weird, but it's only on their account, you can log in as them and see what's going on. And you can do password resets. You can do all of the admin stuff, and you don't even need to write any of that code. It's really, really useful. There's a lot of other stuff you can configure, which you'll see in the configuration panel. Don't be too alarmed about this. We'll go over some of it in later videos, but I kind of just wanted to give you guys a little bit of an overview while Claude was working. So let's go over here, and it's still creating stuff. Hopefully it's going to be able to one-shot this. I think we were pretty clear, and the app is pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and check on it. Nothing changed here. And we'll talk a little bit about what's going to happen at a lower level. So basically, what Cursor is doing is it's writing a bunch of code to do this ID check. So when you first visit the app, the new code is going to ask you, hey, do you have a driver's license? Do you have an ID? If you say, no, I do not, it's going to say, sign up for the app right here. When you sign up, which is going to be us using some stuff from Clerk, that's kind of like your users are visiting the DMV for the first time. So they are going to input their information, their email, all that kind of stuff. And then Clerk is going to say, yep, you're legit. And we are going to see Clerk add a user in the admin panel on Clerk. And that's kind of like, okay, the DMV wrote you down. They know you're legit. They wrote down your license number, all of that stuff. And then Clerk is going to say, okay, here's your license. And it looks like, okay, cool. If you got sign in or create account, that's looking good. But Clerk is going to hand you your license, and then you're going to take that license, and then elsewhere in our app's code, anywhere we go, the first thing that's going to happen is our app is going to check your license to make sure that it's legit. They're going to make sure that it's not expired, and they're going to make sure that you're actually who you say you are. It looks like it's finished. Let's give it a shot. So we're up on localhost 8081. Let's create an account. And you'll notice here, yep, welcome. Please fill in details to get started. Okay, it looks like it had to do one more update while I open the button. But if you do create an account, you'll notice we can either do email, address, and password, or we can sign with Google. I'm going to do it with Google. It's just easier. I don't want to type stuff in. Hopefully this works. Yep, okay, and so we got the login screen here. It looks legit. We're going to click on my account here. We're going to click continue. And now we are logged in. You're going to notice it says, hello, Tommy. And not only does that work, we can go in here. We can sign out. So let's go ahead and sign out. And then you'll notice here, yep, we've got the login screen again. And if we go back into Clerk and we refresh this guy, we're going to see that this is the account that was created. And like I mentioned, we can see the name, the email address, we can see when they joined, that kind of stuff. And over here, the user ID, this is kind of like their driver's license number. So just like how on your driver's license, you've got a number, the user ID is going to uniquely identify you. You've got the email, all this other information. And you'll notice here, you can, like I promised you guys, set passwords. You can do passkeys. You can set up pretty much anything you'd ever want to. And all that's going to be secure and just work, which is really, really nice. Because if you had the AI do this from scratch, it's almost certainly going to mess it up. So anyway, we've got that working. Let's go back into tic-tac-toe. We're going to sign in, so continue with Google. Looks good, and now we are signed in, so we can play around. Looks really cool. Reset, new game. It's all working, which is awesome. So this looks good. I want to go into some details on how to debug issues, and I promise it won't be too scary, but what we're going to do here is we're going to hit F12 while we're opening Google Chrome, and this is going to open the developer console. This is going to be relevant for pretty much any kind of vibe coding or coding you're doing for that matter. And what happens here is a lot of lower level system messages and important information gets printed here. And even if you don't understand what it means, you're going to be able to pass it to the AI. And there's a few important tabs. First, we have elements. And the thing about elements is if you click on this little arrow icon here and you click anywhere on the screen, it is going to highlight in the document. And this document actually represents the entire web page. That is going to highlight the subsection of the web page that corresponds to the document. So basically this little block of code here corresponds to this blue 0 for player O. So the elements tab is useful for that. The console is going to display a bunch of errors or messages for you. So if you're seeing anything weird, feel free to just copy everything from the console, copy that and paste it into Cursor and say, hey, I'm seeing this in the console, and then explain your issue. That's going to give it a lot more context. And these are yellow, which means they're warnings. We could probably ignore them. Probably better to not have them, but we're going to leave them for now. And then finally, we're also going to have the network tab. And what's interesting here is you're going to notice that we have a bunch of requests. So anytime in the web browser that we make an external request, so that would be to Clerk, that would be to some other service, whatever, we are going to see an entry over here. And if you'll notice, we can click on them. We're going to get a few different tabs here. The one that we care about is really the response for now. And you're going to notice that we have the token, which is called a JWT. Now, this is actually the driver's license. So what you see here is literally the driver's license. So if somebody had this token, that would be like somebody stole your driver's license, and they would be able to impersonate you. If they had this token and they made a request to your application, that would be you. And so these tokens are actually a little bit sensitive. But you'll also notice that some of the requests we're getting more information. So this is information about the session. And you're going to notice here that this is going to contain all the information like my name, my email address, the images, all that kind of stuff. And this combination, so the JWT and the session information, this two pieces of information is what allows our application to be confident that when it's checking your authentication, you are actually who you say you are. It has your name. It knows your email is legit because think about it. It's like your driver's license. Your name's on the license, so that's how we know that your name is actually real, because we know the license is real. And that's what's happening here. So Clerk is giving you this token, and all of that information is encoded in this token. And your browser is basically just doing a check like it's a bouncer at a club or a bar. Now, it's not, you probably won't be going in here too often, but this F12 browser console is gonna come up more, especially as we go through videos in the series. And I don't want you to be afraid of it, even if you're not exactly sure everything that's going on. There's a lot of different panels and configurations. I mean, it's a really mature tool, so it's bound to happen that you're gonna get a little bit overwhelmed. But the important ones are the console, and then also the Elements tab, where you can figure out exactly where pieces of your web page live in terms of the code that's on the browser. Now that we're back in Clerk, I kind of want to show you guys, if you click on the 3 dots here, you can ban a user, you can delete a user. So for instance, if we go ahead and delete a user, it says it's permanent, cannot be undone. Now if I log back into this app, what's happening is it's kind of like if the DMV took your name off the list, so it removed your driver's license number and it removed everything. So that would be like if you got pulled over and you handed a driver's license and then they went and ran it back in the cop car and they said, hey, I know this looks like a real license, but it's not coming up anywhere on our system. So what we just did there is we removed a user from our DMV. And so even though they have a driver's license that looks legit, our app is gonna look at it and say, hey, we don't actually see anything in Clerk. And so you're not actually on the list, even if you had a driver's license that was at one point valid. So now we can go and create an account again. We're gonna continue with Google. And yeah, it's just exactly what we saw before. You can click on this stuff, works perfectly well, super easy. This is gonna take a second, hopefully not too long. I don't know what's going on here. Let's refresh this. Okay. So I just need to refresh, that's a little odd. But I will also highlight that there is a manage account section. So users in your app, you don't have to do anything. They can like upload a profile picture. They can go into security. They can set a password and sign out of all other devices. So really basic seeming stuff that you're gonna need in almost any application. And the benefit of using Clerk, especially for a vibe coder, is this stuff looks pretty professional, it all works, and you're leaning on them to implement the security, but honestly, they're probably gonna do a better job than you would if you don't know what you're doing. So I think it's a worthy trade-off. That's why I really like using a service like Clerk, but really the fundamental problem that you need to be thinking about is, how is my app going to know that a user is actually who they say they are? That is all about authentication. So hopefully you learned something from this video. I wanted to go a little more in detail about how the authentication process actually works, what's actually happening in your web browser, and where these third-party providers like Clerk, which are kind of like DMVs, fit into the ecosystem. And I wanted to give you guys a step-by-step guide for adding this stuff as a vibe coder, even if you don't understand the low-level code changes that were actually being made. If you found the video useful, please leave a comment below. I'm gonna be making more videos in the series. The next one's gonna be about authorization. So we're gonna talk about how to allow users to access certain things and prevent them from accessing certain other things. Sort of like what we saw in Google Docs, where I'm only allowed to access my documents that I have access to. Anyway, let me know what you think. Hope you guys have a good day. We'll see you on the next one.